Yeah, so what I'd like to do, as opposed to just talk at you for an hour, is actually to spend the first half of our time together doing a little bit of history. And then we can debrief after that. And then maybe, hopefully, if I'm really virtuous, we'll have time for questions. And we'll talk. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So actually, I need 2 volunteers to help me pass out our reading for today. All right? Our youngest student. Excellent. There you go. Thanks. All right. So here's the thing about history. History is dangerous, even when it's not right after lunch. It's provocative, and I've decided that today we're going to jump right into the middle of that, right? By reading and thinking about something that is perhaps, at least in the States, highly controversial, the French Revolution. And not just any moment during the French Revolution, but that moment, perhaps that key moment, in which Marie Antoinette was executed, beheaded. Okay. So just a little bit of background. Obviously, if you were my students, the first day of school would not be on the execution of Marie Antoinette, right? So I think today's discussion kind of presupposes a little bit of background, knowledge and all of that, ideally. And I'm not going to give you any. I'm not going to give you any context, okay? But I'm just to say, if I was teaching you modern European history, we would have gone through the beginnings of the French Revolution and taken that path all the way until we get to this kind of key moment. But my expectation is not necessarily that you would have any background knowledge of the French Revolution. That's not really my interest. My interest is to model for you a little bit how we can best really peer into a period of history. Okay? And so if you're worried because your history is maybe a little rusty, don't worry about it. We'll be fine. Good? Okay, so what you have in front of you are several primary sources. Okay? And one of them is the account of, I think I'm all right. One is the letter of accusation, the act of accusation written up by the Revolutionary Court. The second is the last words that we have of Marie Antoinette, her letter to her sister-in-law. And then we have a couple of third-person perspectives about her execution. Okay, so our job is to look at this historical evidence in the form of primary sources and try to get a feel for the emotions and what's at stake during this kind of critical moment during the French Revolution. Sound good? All right, so let's read together. Yep. Oh, uh-oh. We have a French speaker in the room. So I need somebody to volunteer reading the act of accusation. You can go all the way from sort of the beginning there, all the way up into, but not including, where it says the last letter of the widow Capet. Who will volunteer to read for us? Somebody bold, somebody courageous. All right, there she is.
But Marie Antoinette, the act of accusation presented against Maria Antoinette of Austria, ci-devant Queen of France, by the accusateur public. Marie Antoinette, widow of Louis Capet, the scourge and bloodsucker of the French, stands accused and charged. First, with having dilapidated and lavished the finances of the nation in concert with the execrable Cologne, by causing to be transmitted to the Emperor of several millions, which still serve to carry on the war against France. Secondly, with having, in imitation of Richard and Medicis, who also call themselves Queens of France, conspired against the liberty of the French nation. Third, with having excited the murders of October 5th and 6th. Fourthly, with having, in concert with Vallée and Lafayette, caused the patriots to be butchered in the Camp de Mars. Fifthly, with having prevailed upon the Swiss fire on the people on the 10th of August. Sixthly, with having another Agrippa, having like another Agrippa, forgotten she was a mother in order to abuse her children.
Yeah, why don't we read this part too?
After the examination closed, the Queen was soon condemned as guilty of having been accessory to and having cooperated in different manoeuvres against the liberty of France, of having entertained a correspondence with the enemies of the Republic, of having participated in a plot tending to kindle civil strife in the interior of the Republic and against each other. The morning of the 16th of October 1793, this unhappy victim of democratic fury was ignominiously carried to the place of execution. The whole of Paris was on foot from the palace to the Place de la Revolution. The streets were lined by two very close rows of armed citizens. The Queen was in a white loose dress, but they had tied her arms behind her. As she passed along, the multitude frequently cried out, "Bravo!" at the place of execution. She looked firmly round her on all sides. She was accompanied by the ci-devant curate of S. Landry, a constitutional priest, and on the scaffold preserved her natural dignity of mind.
Thank you very much. Not an easy reading. You did a good job. Okay, so again, our goal here is to try to understand this moment in history, and I think maybe we should begin just making sure we know what the words mean. So was there any vocabulary? Were there any words that were difficult for us? We're not sure what what they mean. Yeah. Ignominiously. What does that mean? It's hard. You say that 10 times fast. Ignominiously. What does that mean?
It means something like without any dignity.
Yeah. That's what the context seems to suggest, doesn't it? Yeah. Ignominiously. Yeah. Without any honor, perhaps. Sounds a little bit like ignorance, doesn't it? Yeah. So without faith, without grandeur, without dignity. Yeah, without ceremony. Good. Other words. Yeah. Well, what does it seem like a compliment? No. This one's a little touchy. What does it sound like? Yes. Okay. So I think that's enough said there. Good. Any other words? I think we're all right. So, and again, I'm not assuming that you know what all of these different occasions were that are being described in this text. It's okay. So the first question is what is the tone? What is the tone of this act of accusation? Is there emotional content to it? What would you say?
It's quite like accusatory.
Yes.
It's confident in its statements.
Yes.
As being guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Legalistic.
Is it? Yes.
Bit of fury, the scourge and bloodsucker of the French.
Okay, so maybe not so legalistic, actually. Could you imagine a legal document that refers to the accused as a bloodsucker? Yeah. So that's strange, right? There's kind of a mixture of legalese and but also some
Decided bias.
yeah, some emotional weight of some kind here. Okay. Interesting. So we have this accusation, really an indictment of Marie Antoinette, and there are all these accusations. How many accusations are there?
6.
All right, 6. And again, these are sort of dipping into very particular moments in history. I'm not going to assume we're fluent in them. But I'm wondering if we have a basic sense for what these accusations are. What's the first accusation regarding?
Financial.
Yeah, money. Money. Yeah. So what exactly is she being accused of from a financial perspective?
Spending the nation's money on lavish, wasted money.
7 million.
Okay, yes. So lavishness. Actually, this is unusual, right? Lavishing is being used as a verb. Usually it's an adjective. So lavishing money in a way that's not appropriate. But that's only the first half of the accusation, the first accusation. What's the second half? What's she doing with the money?
Giving it to another emperor to have a war against France.
Okay, now that's weird, isn't it? Because she's the Queen of France. So why would the head of the kingdom, why would the Queen of France send millions of francs to a foreign emperor so that they could make war on France? That's weird. Why would she do that?
So they don't execute him.
Okay.
People in power in France weren't actually the French rulers, and so her trying to restore something.
Yeah, yeah. If you look at the way that she's referred to under the title, The Act of Accusation, what's the first description of her? Of Austria, right? So, of course, she is an Austrian princess, Austro-Hungarian princess, whose brother is the emperor. Ah, okay, so maybe this is her just giving money to her family. Okay, and so that would be concerning, of course. A serious accusation indeed. But why would her brother make war on France when it's her kingdom? Strange.
Is she trying to, are they trying to take over France and make it part of Austria?
Yeah, maybe they're trying to invade it and incorporate it into the empire. Okay. Well, let's hold on to that then for a moment. Let's hold on to that. If we're not sure why she would be accused of attacking her own country, let's hold on to that. What are the second set of accusations? So let's say, I'm going to say we can categorize accusations 2 through 5. They all have something in common.
Instigating the people.
Yeah, okay, so attacking the people. What else? Conspiring against the liberty of the people. Yeah, the murders of people. So why is she attacking her own people? Ah, okay, so wait a minute. Is she attacking the Kingdom of France? Okay, right, so there's a revolution. It's a civil war, yes? So from the revolutionaries' perspective, they are France, right? But would that be Marie Antoinette's perspective? No, right? They are the ones who are traitors against the Kingdom of France, right? And that might help us with the first accusation as well, might it? Right? Why might the Emperor of Austria be making war with Frenchmen?
Two different ideas of what France is completely.
Right. So there's a presumption here, an assumption in the text about what France is. And that's interesting.
I do have a little French knowledge.
Aha.
It's helpful. Like this ci devant
Yeah.
is formally. So she is actually, when they're accusing her, she's actually no longer the Queen of France. She's the form. And the reason he's called Louis Pet was that was the name they gave him after they deposed him and then they charged him. So they were actually, at this time, Louis had been executed. And Marie, they weren't actually, they were the former king and queen.
Correct. So you'll notice she is nowhere called the Queen of France, right? So the revolutionaries would say, of course, that they have the right to depose her. She might think differently. Yeah, good. Yeah. Yeah, one interesting note, right? And well, actually, let's go to the sixth accusation. This is perhaps the one that's most disturbing. Okay, so the first one is about this financial lavishness, but it has something to do with actually sponsoring a war against the revolutionaries. Hard to blame her, though, right? And then there's the violence on the royalist side during the revolution. Okay, but what's the sixth and final accusation is different in character. Yeah. Okay, so Let's read that again. With having like another Agrippina forgotten she was a mother in order to abuse her children. Does anybody know who Agrippina was? Okay. So just a little footnote, Roman history. Agrippina is the most notorious mother of all time. Does anybody know who her son was? Yeah? Nero. It's the mother of Nero. Okay. Can you imagine? Actually, if you ever, listen, this is the beauty of reading history through primary sources. If you ever go and read Suetonius, there's this whole account of how Nero has to try to kill his mother in all these different sorts of ways. And the first thing he does is he creates a machine so when she lies down on her bed, it will drop ceiling tiles on her, but it doesn't work. And then he invents a boat, and the boat is constructed so that when it gets hit, if it was in a collision, it would collapse and then sink. Unfortunately, he forgot that his mother could swim. And so the boat collapsed, it sank, and she swam to shore. So finally, he ended up just poisoning her. But anyhow, so there's this very dysfunctional historical account and a thought that it was an abusive relationship between Agrippina and Nero. Okay, so what is being said of Marie Antoinette here? What do you mean? You mean her biological children or her? Oh, you're guessing. Okay. Yeah.
Is it a metaphor?
Yeah, so you could read it as a metaphor, right? And who would, in a metaphor, who would her children be? Right. Okay, but if we were to read it literally, and we just need more evidence to know, but if we were to read it literally, what would it mean? Just to state the ugly. Right, she was abusing her children. Okay, so, to me, a very serious accusation, something to be taken seriously. Yes? Okay, so let's suspend this. There's still some questions. I think we have a basic sense of the tone, the tenor, and the content of the accusation against her. Let's read her last words. Good? I need a volunteer, hopefully a female volunteer. Yes, please.
It is to you, my sister, that I write for the last time. I have just been condemned, not to a shameful death, for such as only for criminals, but to go and rejoin your brother. Innocent like him, I hope to show the same firmness in my last moments. I am calm, as one is when one's conscience reproaches one with nothing. I feel profound sorrow in leaving my poor children. You know that I only live for them and for you, my good and tender sister. You who out of love have sacrificed everything to be with us. In what a position do I leave you? I have learned from the proceedings at my trial that my daughter was separated from you. Alas, poor child, I do not venture to write to her. She would not receive my letter. I do not even know whether this will reach you. Do you receive my blessing for both of them? I hope that one day when they are older they may be able to rejoin you and enjoy to the full your tender care. Let them both think of the lesson which I have never ceased to impress upon them, that the principles and the exact performance of their duties are the chief foundation of life, and then mutual affection and confidence in one another will constitute its happiness. Let my daughter feel that at her age she ought always to aid her brother by the advice which her greater experience and her affection may inspire her to give him. And let my son in his turn render to his sister all the care and all the services which affection can inspire. Let them, in short, both feel that in whatever positions they may be placed, they will never be truly happy but through their union. Let them follow our example. In our own misfortunes, how much comfort has our affection for one another afforded us? And in times of happiness, we have enjoyed that doubly from being able to share it with a friend. And where can one find friends more tender and more united than in one's own family? Let my son never forget the last words of his father, which I repeat emphatically, let him never seek to avenge our deaths. I have to speak to you of one thing which is very painful to my heart. I know how much pain the child must have caused you. Forgive him, my dear sister. Think of his age and how easy it is to make a child say whatever one wishes, especially when he does not understand it. It will come to pass one day, I hope, that better the value of your kindness and of your tender affection for both of them. It remains to confide to you my last thoughts. I should have wished to write them at the beginning of my trial, but besides that they did not leave me any means of writing, events have passed so rapidly that I really have not had time. I die in the Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman religion, that of my fathers, that in which I was brought up, and which I have always professed. Having no spiritual consolation to look for, not even knowing whether there are still in this place any priests of that religion, and indeed the place where I am would expose them to much danger if they were to enter it but once. I sincerely implore pardon of God, for all the faults which I may have committed during my life. I trust that in his goodness he will mercifully accept my last prayers, as well as those which I have for a long time addressed to him, to receive my soul into his mercy. I beg pardon of all whom I know, and especially of you, my sister, for all the vexations which, without intending it, I may have caused you. I pardon all my enemies the evils that they have done with me. I bid farewell to my aunts and to all my brothers and sisters. I had friends. The idea of being forever separated from them and from all their troubles is one of the greatest sorrows that I suffer in dying. Let them at least know that to my latest moment I thought of them. Farewell, my good and tender sister. May this letter reach you. Think always of me. I embrace you with all my heart as I do my poor dear children. My God, how heart-rending it is to leave them forever. Farewell, farewell, I must now occupy myself with spiritual duties, as I am not free in my actions. Perhaps they will bring me a priest, but I here protest that I will not say a word to him, but that I will treat him as a total stranger.
Thank you. Beautifully read. So, yeah, these are the last words, or the last recorded words of Marie Antoinette. So, I'm curious, how would we characterize her and her, where she's at right now in these final moments of her life? Yeah?
This is a sense of like purity and piety, like she's searching for her conscience and is thinking of others' last prayers, God receiving her soul into his mercy.
I thought she was very stoic and resolved that she was not going to compromise on her beliefs of that she hadn't done anything wrong. But there was grief being expressed for her children and loss of relationship with her sister and everything.
And by the way, we have, so I think we have evidence, good evidence here in her letter of that composure, but do we have evidence in the first document as well? What's that final line?
Preserve her natural dignity of mind.
Yeah, so that composure seems to certainly be the case. Good. What else? How else might we characterize her, or how else might we describe her from these her last words?
She designed to grow her children.
Yes, and that does seem important given the context. Yeah. What does she want for her children?
Unity.
Mm-hmm.
She wants them to support each other.
Yes.
And she and her sister have been able to support each other.
Yeah. There is one point that she really seems to stress regarding kind of like this final instruction for her son. Yes. Okay, so that's pretty striking, I think. Right at the bottom of 2, let my son never forget the last words of his father, which I repeat emphatically, let him never seek to avenge our deaths. So that's interesting.
But she's also wanting to make sure she's got a right standing with God, because having no spiritual consolation to look for, not knowing whether there are still in this place any priests of that religion, I implore pardon of God for all faults. And so there's still, but then she rejects the priest at the end.
Yeah, so now that's weird, right? Like why, the vast majority of this, she declares, I die in the Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman religion, that of my fathers, that in which I was brought up, but then she's rejecting the priest at the end. Why would she do that?
Is it a false priest?
Why would you think that?
Similar things happened, I know, in Russia when the Bolsheviks took over.
Okay.
There's a state-sponsored church which was not part of the true church. Under parallels.
So let me ask you this. We actually, in this reading, in this series of texts, know something about her last moments after she wrote this. Was there a priest there at her death?
Yes.
Yeah, how was he described? Constitutional priest. What's a constitutional priest?
State.
Yeah, the state. Okay, so this is a priest not of Rome. This would be a priest who signed an oath of fidelity to the revolution. So it's a revolutionary priest.
And she said earlier that they'd be in danger if they were to come where she was.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
the priest that she would speak to comes wherever she will be held.
Right, so a priest who is not a state agent would be at risk. The sort of priest that would be free to be there would be not the sort of priest that she would confess her sins to. Yeah, okay. So there is this mysterious portion of the text that suggests some kind of context, and this is the top of 3. Let's read this again. I have to speak to you of one thing that is very painful to my heart. I know how much pain the child must have caused you. Forgive him, my dear sister, think of his age, and how easy it is to make a child say whatever one wishes, especially when he does not understand it. It will come to pass one day, I hope, that he will better feel the value of your kindness and of your tender affection for both of them. What's she talking about? I mean, it's hard to know. Okay, her son.
Perhaps he was made to confess abuse.
Yeah, and in fact, and we don't have this here, but in fact, even in the revolutionary documents, we know that her very young son, I think it was 8, was made drunk and beaten and then forced to sign a letter of accusation against his parents. But just to be clear, what's her attitude about that? Yeah. Yeah.
He's too young to understand.
Okay.
She has full understanding and she's given her complete forgiveness. She's extended forgiveness to him.
Yeah.
She's very acceptable to him.
But she believes that one day he will understand and may want to avenge the death, which she's previously said not to do.
Right, which he is not to do.
Yeah.
So one day he may understand and may seek vengeance, but he is not to do so, according to the last will, the last spoken command of his father. Yeah, so look, to be clear, we're not evaluating the French monarchy. In order to do that, we'd have to look at a lot of evidence. And well, first of all, we'd have to figure out what makes a good king or queen. And these days, it seems as if king or queen is already, a sign of guilt, right? Because we don't make much of a distinction between a king and a tyrant. So we'd have to figure that out, and then we'd have to really look and see whether Marie Antoinette, whether Louis were good kings or not. What were their failings? Doubtless there were many. And what were their virtues, right? And that's not our goal today. This isn't an attack on the French monarchy, nor is it a defense of it. But what we are trying to do is we're trying to peer into the very final moments of this woman's life and try to understand this key moment. So if I was responsible and we were really going to continue this exploration, we would look at these 2 texts on the back. And what we have here are these 2 third-person accounts of Marie Antoinette. And one is by Thomas Jefferson, who's very critical of her. And the other is of her great and famous defender, Edmund Burke, in his work, Reflections on the Revolution in France. So we're not going to read that together today because I have some thoughts to share with you about history more generally. But I invite you to do that. And I think in the context of a classroom with students, I would. Because again, it's really important that we're reading a broad swath of evidence when it comes to kind of evaluating the importance and the significance of this moment. Good. So I hope that you enjoyed that reading. You know, sometimes there's this idea that reading primary sources is uninteresting, that it would be boring. And more times than not, I think that primary sources are infinitely more interesting and revealing than textbooks. And so I encourage you. I encourage you to take a look at the primary sources if you're teaching a history lesson. I think what we'll do so that you can see the slides is we'll turn off the lights. Is that okay? Yeah. She's not going to get upset if I do, will she? No. She's courageous in the dark. All right. All right. I want to talk a little bit about history, and I want to begin with a question that might seem silly. But actually, it's really a live question. And that is history important? Now, of course, there is an obvious group of people whose tendency is to say, no, history is not important. And that would be sort of those folks who, let's say, represent a progressive mentality. Right? And there's a very good reason why, if you're kind of coming from a progressive perspective, you want to do away with history. And that's because meaning for you comes from the future, from a utopia that you're seeking to arrive at. Or, in the words of Henry Ford, that history is more or less bunk. It's tradition, and we don't want tradition. We want to live in the present, and the only history that's worth a tinker's dam is the history we make today. Okay, so it's a very strong kind of opinion, right? And so that's one reason why we might dismiss history. But you might be surprised to know that a lot of folks in the classical world are also dismissive of history, which is interesting. And but actually, the reason, when you think about it for a moment, is obvious. So I don't know if you're real familiar with the 7 liberal arts, right? You have the trivium, you have the quadrivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, you have arithmetic, you have geometry, you have music and astronomy. Where's history? It's not one of the liberal arts. And it's not one of the sciences either. All right? It's not theology, it's not philosophy, right? So where is history? And some of these folks would say, well, history is a modern invention, right? Or at least the way we teach it. It's a modern invention the way that museums are a modern invention. There were no museums in the Renaissance, right? Okay. There is a reason to be worried about history, I would say, if we're really being honest. And the reason is this. It's unlike every other subject you study. Let's say that you are studying chemistry. And you're not just taking a textbook's word for chemical reactions, you're actually being a chemist. And you want to study the reality of chemistry. What do? Well, you look at these chemical reactions here, won't you? And let's say that you were interested in studying poetry. You really wanted to engage in the reality of poetry. What would you look at? Well, you'd look at poems. You might even try your hand at some verse. And maths. You might actually wrestle with mathematical realities on the board or on a piece of paper or whatever. Yeah. In biology, you'd look at frogs. Okay. But history is different from all of these. Because by definition, the reality that you're studying in history is not in front of you. It can't be in front of you. By definition, it is distant from you, often in space and always in time. And so the question is, can you ever actually know history because of that distance? And so there are people who say history is always propaganda. It's always, right? Think of that saying, history is written by the victor. Yes? It's always a narrative that's trying to convince me of somebody else's narrative. And so that is one of the things that makes history strange and odd. And indeed, I would say that the way history is taught is 98.27%, I made that number up, percent of the time taught badly. The present company excluded, of course. Right? And the reason is that we're guilty of these pitfalls. Okay? So on the one hand, let's start with progressivism there on the bottom. On the one hand, there's often this bias that, the vast majority of history textbooks have, right? That history is advancing toward this ultimate utopia, right? Most textbooks, this isn't a conspiracy theory, this really is fact, right? Most textbooks are Marxist. That's, I don't think anybody would debate that. So there's this innate agenda in the majority of textbooks that's fundamentally progressive, utopian in nature. Okay. But on the other side, we could also risk triumphalism. There's a certain group of people, a certain set of textbooks that want to suggest that the story of Western civilization is one of unblemished glory, that no errors or sins were ever committed in the Crusades. The conquistadors were entirely justified in everything that they did, right? And this is also propaganda. It may be propaganda that's more allied to the team that we root for, but it's still propaganda. And then there's anachronism, which everybody's guilty of, which is essentially thinking that from our modern contemporary experience, we understand reality best, and we kind of superimpose our modern standards on all of our ancestors, and basically we treat them like they're really primitive moderns. Which, by the way, is the opposite attitude of all of our ancestors. All of our ancestors believed that if you wanted to look for wisdom, you would look to the past. You would look to tradition. So that's interesting. So here's the question. Is there a way to study history that doesn't fall into these pitfalls? Is there a way to encounter history that isn't just propaganda? Is there a way, in other words, to actually encounter truth and reality in a history classroom? That's the question. And I would say if the answer is no, you shouldn't teach it. Right? Okay, so let's talk about what history is. And of course, you may know that the word goes back to purportedly the very first historian, Herodotus, right, who wrote the Histories. That's where the word comes from. And history, for Herodotus, is a type of inquiry that is essentially interpreting the most important events, the important narratives of the past. And this might raise a question. Well, who decides what's important from the past? And is it the case that it's self-evident that some things are important, right? But no matter who you are, right, history is not all of the facts that happened before. So if we study history, and we believe it's legitimate to study history, then we have to assume that there are certain moments from the past that have a special significance. It's one of the assumptions that we have to have. Okay. So, okay, where does history come from? Where does history come from? And I think that most people, most students have this idea that history is this sort of objective thing that we definitely know about. And you read a textbook, and then you find out about what happened, and then you know. It's very objective, very cut and dry. Okay. How does the writer of a textbook know what happened? If you're a historian, do you read a textbook to figure out what happened? Maybe you look at some secondary sources sometimes. Probably wouldn't look at a textbook. But if you're my brother's a historian. If you're a historian, how do you find out what happened in the past? Right. Yeah, you look for the evidence itself. And in this case, the evidence that brings you most proximate to these ancient, medieval, or even modern events that are separated from us by time. Right? So this, Martin Gilbert, is a student of C.S. Lewis and of Tolkien. He says that the historian has several tools, among them chronology, documentation, memoirs, as well as the vast sort of body of scholarly work. Right? Okay, so if we're going to do real history, then what we would do is we would go to these primary sources. We would look at oral tradition, primary sources, and archaeological evidence. Did you know, by the way, that historians and archaeologists refuse to talk to one another? It's disturbing. But we should definitely make sure that our students are looking at archaeological evidence and primary sources. Okay. So what a historian does, and if we're serious about teaching history, I'm going to argue that we want our students to be historians, to develop good historian habits. What we want them to do isn't to memorize a narrative from a textbook. What we want them to do is to look at the evidence, and by looking at the evidence, develop an interpretation and a narrative. That's the goal. That's what we want to be doing with them. Oh, now I want to make an important distinction before we continue. The way that history is taught young children needs to be different than the way that it is taught, let's say, middle school and high school students. Okay, so the way that a younger child encounters history should be very similar to the way that, that they receive stories and literature, as if they were receiving the great stories of the past through an oral tradition. So for example, I've got two sons. Well, I've got three sons, but two sons that are sort of in those mid-elementary years, Jude and Gregan. Okay, so Jude and Gregan, right? Let's say we're studying American history. It's very important to me that Jude and Gregan have a piety for the past and for their homeland, for their country and its origin, right? And piety, I don't know about in Australia, but in the US, nobody uses the word piety. That's kind of a bad word, you know, like we don't want that, right? But it is so important with younger children that they look with a reverence and a piety to the stories and the contributions of their ancestors. It's essential. Now, I have some questions about the founding fathers of the United States. I have some concerns about some of the philosophical underpinnings of their thought. But I would never introduce those to Jude and Gregan when they're in elementary school, right? So we have to remember what's age appropriate for different students. They need to have that nascent early stage of piety. And then I think when they're in middle school, increasingly in high school, and certainly at university, right? These are the moments where they're really digging into the evidence and really asking those tough questions, still in a spirit of love and in piety, but now with a maturity that allows them to do a deeper analysis. So I think this is a really important distinction for us to make. Okay, so let's talk about textbooks. Because if you're a history teacher, almost certainly you're using a textbook. And let's be really clear about the risk of textbooks. So the problem I'm sort of reiterating here is that textbooks don't give us historical evidence. They give us a historical narrative. And almost all textbooks, I'm not aware of a single good textbook. Almost all textbooks, let's say, give us a narrative that is probably not the one that we want our children to have, for one reason or for another, right? And a lot of times, perhaps even worse, textbooks are boring. I mean, if you want to crush a student's love of history, you should give them a textbook. Yeah? So I used to, when I was a headmaster, I used to always interview incoming students, and I would ask them lots of questions, but one question I'd ask them is, well, what's your favorite subject? And I'd ask them, what's your least favorite subject? And history was most likely to be in either of those two categories, right? And it has a lot to do with what their experience of history was. Okay, so textbooks often just become like this encyclopedic string of facts, factoids. But history is a story. So not only do they lack historical evidence, not only do they often represent an agenda, but they lose that compelling narrative. I mean, to be honest, no matter what you think of Marie Antoinette, would you say that her last letter is powerful? Yes, right? Sometimes there's this idea that primary sources are boring and stuffy, and I'm here to tell you it's not true. They're far more interesting than textbooks and far more compelling in creating a narrative about the past. Okay, so could you use textbooks? Is there a use for textbooks, right? Because probably right now what you're hearing me say is we should burn all of them. And I do think that there are some uses for textbooks, okay? So, number one, for large pieces of history, it's absolutely possible to do everything just with primary sources. So take Roman history or Greek history, for instance. If you're studying Greek history, you can use entirely primary sources pretty easily, right? You just start with your Herodotus, and then you move to your Thucydides, and maybe some Plutarch, right? It's very simple to do that. And same is really true of Roman. And let's say early church, late classical period. But the minute you get into the Middle Ages, it becomes a lot harder. Why? Because the Middle Ages aren't a time, right? It's many narratives, many kingdoms. And the further you go, the more that is the case, right? And so how do you weave all of that together into one narrative when it's actually not one narrative? I mean, ideally, we would study the story of those kingdoms all separately a little bit, but we don't have time. Okay, so how do you create a compelling narrative for that? Sometimes, as a teacher, you have to depend a little bit on the textbook narrative to weave things together, especially medieval, Renaissance, early modern, late modern European history. That's just a fact. And by the way, what I'm talking about with history books, it's not religious, right? It's not a moral claim. You should use textbooks when it's useful to use textbooks, but know that students reading and memorizing information from a textbook is not doing historical work. That's the point. So you just don't want to overuse them. You want to use them appropriately. Perhaps, though, the best use is really for you as a teacher, as a reference, right? Because if you're teaching primarily through primary sources and you're trying to guide students through a line of questioning through those primary sources, right, you may need a lay of the land. Unless you're really a great historian, you may need a lay of the land that helps you put everything together. But the point is that the textbook works for you. You don't work for the textbook. You're not a functionary of the textbook. The textbook is your tool, right? And I would really fact check your textbooks because they're filled with inaccuracies. It's really quite shocking. Agenda-driven inaccuracies. Okay. So next. It's really important that if you're going to have students do that historical work themselves, that you ask them different levels of questioning, right? That you pursue different lines of questioning with them. So a lot of times, if you watch a teacher, even a Socratic teacher, teach history, it's like they're going through a fill-in-the-blank test, right? They're just asking factual questions. Are the facts important? Are knowledge level questions important? Yeah, absolutely. We ought to know that the Battle of Hastings was in the year 1066. But is that history? Is that all of history? Is it even history at all? No, right? We want to use the point of the facts is to drive us to the narrative. And so we need to be asking questions that are provoking students to look at the facts, to put them together, and to develop a narrative. And so questions of understanding are important. So for instance, it would be good to ask them about what they think the impact of the Saxons having to fight the Vikings at the Battle of Sturm Bridge right before the Battle of Hastings, what they think the implications of that were on their battle with the Normans. And then we need to go even deeper. We need to go into really thought-provoking, more open-ended lines of questioning, such as, okay, what are the ramifications of having a king who doesn't speak the language of his people? Right? William the Conqueror didn't speak English. So this is not Alfred the Great, right? William the Conqueror is not burning oatcakes with peasant ladies. Yeah? He doesn't think that he needs to speak English in order to be the king of England. Okay, that's interesting. Does that mean that what a king is has changed in the understanding of the English monarchs? What ramifications might that have in the history of England? These are important questions, the sorts of questions that we want to be bringing up if we're really going to be getting into the import and the significance of the historical narrative. Good. Okay. So just a couple of closing thoughts. I think that we're really tempted to look at historical figures like they're objects, to objectify them. We don't have to acknowledge their personhood because they're from another time and place. And this is not healthy. I think that there needs to be a spirit of charity when we encounter historical figures and events. We are not studying strangers. We're studying our ancestors. We're studying our cultural ancestors. And they committed great heroic deeds and also shameful acts, right? They committed great good and they did evil. That is all true. But they deserve piety. They deserve respect. You and I also do good and evil. We also will one day only be a memory. And we also deserve that charity. And we have to model that for students. So this is Professor McClay, the professor at Hillsdale College, University of Oklahoma, says, the two things, celebration and criticism, are not necessarily enemies. Love is the foundation of the wisest criticism, and criticism is the essential partner of an honest and enduring love. Don't tell my wife that, though. Yeah. So these two things aren't in tension with one another, right? We can be critical. We can be objective. We can judge a previous event and do that still within the spirit of love and charity. And I think this is really, really important, right? So at the end of the day, is history important? Look, history is our story. It's your story and it's my story that we are heirs to, that our students and our children are heirs to, right? It tells of the great nobility and the great villainy, the heroic acts and the troubles and the challenges of our ancestors, our great-great-grandpapas and great-great-grandmamas, right? It's their story and it is our story. And this is a point frequently made, but important, if we're to know what the point of it all is, and where we go from here, and what the right decisions are, and what we can relinquish, and what we can, and what is worth fighting for, and what isn't, we're going to have to know that story. We're going to have to know something about the path that we're on, that we didn't start, but here we are midway along it. Right? Are we moving in the right direction? Right? Are we progressing? Or is it the case that being progressive actually means turning around or taking another route, as C.S. Lewis suggests, right? If you want to move forward, sometimes, depending on the times, you need to turn around. So there's this beautiful quote from the American author Gurney Norman. He says, sanity is knowing what story you're in. So if you want sanity for yourself, for your children, for your students, I think you have to know what story you're in. And the name of that story is history. But it has to be a story that's embedded in the truth. It can't be a power move. It's got to be something based off of evidence. It has to be a story that's discovered, and it has to be something that truly gives us a sense of meaning and significance in our lives. All right. I have no idea how much time I have left. How much time do I have left? 5 minutes?
Let's just ask questions.
No. Right. Okay. Questions? Yes. He was biased.
So, Wes Callahan has spoken about the use of textbooks as well.
Uh-huh.
And he said the primary issue with textbooks is that there's a hidden bias to it because it's a board of historians that are writing it, and so it's all being presented as objective fact. And one of the solutions he offers to that, alongside primary sources, is secondary sources from single historians that you can then interact with their interpretation of history and not try to be like, oh, there's no such thing as bias, but engage with bias. Do you see that as suitable?
I think that's great. I think that's great. You just have to really vet them. A lot of them are excellent. A lot of them are not appropriate for, probably the best thing that they serve is you. Probably they're best for your own reading, right? For your own being a student of history. And then you may find fragments or pieces that are actually appropriate for your students. And that's great. That's great. You just need to vet them very, very carefully, I think, and make sure that they're right. And look, there's no problem with an author having a perspective. It's just that you don't want to conflate that perspective with the truth. You want to see that perspective for what it is. But yeah, I think that's great. Yes?
My question is also about primary sources, particularly as someone who, I suppose, to explain to you is a middle school generalist teacher covering all areas.
Yeah.
As someone who's new to reading source documents, I've dabbled in them myself, but just the idea of collating them, for a 15-minute lesson that I teach a couple of times a week. how would you go about even doing that? Where would you go and how would you begin to go?
Well, the real problem is that 15 minutes. And so, yeah, having almost no time makes it very challenging. But the best place to find primary sources, and you can find compendium and all of that, but one of the best places to go for primary sources is the Fordham sourcebook online. So Fordham University has an ancient source book, it has a medieval source book, it has a modern source book, it has an American source book. And this is essentially a library, an archive of primary sources divided by content and index for almost every area. Now again, this isn't something that I would give a student. This is something that I would give you. There's a lot of junk on it, a lot of stuff that's not good, right? But if you're teaching something on the ancient Egyptians, or you're working on something Julius Caesar, or whatever it is, you can go onto the Fordham sourcebook, and you can go down in sort of the table of contents, and you will almost certainly find a primary source that's relevant to that. And a lot of them are short, and they're pithy, and if you're looking for something slightly different, it will give you footnotes to a better place to find it. And the other thing is, honestly, and people would slap me for saying this, but Wikipedia. Not even for what's written in Wikipedia, but for the footnotes in Wikipedia to take you to richer resources. So that's where I would start. Yeah?
You talked about like piety and respect for ancestors and whatnot. How do you, with the younger children, not so much high school, how do you navigate teaching them that, but then also teaching them, what did I write? About to have respect for the victims of said ancestors. How do we teach them respect for both sides without going too deep when they're young?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to do both.
Yeah.
But you know what? Here's the deal. I think those sorts of questions are bigger problems for adults than they are for children. Yeah. I think children actually instinctively know that they should love people. Yeah. And their heart goes out to people, both people who are in one position or in another. So actually, I don't think you have to work that hard. It's almost like a thought experiment to my mind. But yeah, should you love victims of some atrocity? You should. And I think that's usually pretty natural to them. Can you love the aggressor? Maybe that's a little bit harder. And there, I think you have to be careful. So let me give you an example that somebody mentioned to me at lunch, right? What about Hitler? Right? Is what I'm saying not true when we're talking about Hitler or Stalin? And so I'm just going to say this, okay? I think one of the important things that we need to help our students with when we read about the Nazis, for instance, is that we not allow our students to look at the Nazis as look at these evil, villainous people that are such a distance from us, right? What we know about the Nazis is that many of them were very ordinary people. And that we are not so far ourselves from potential villainy, right? But we are capable of evil. And that should concern us, right? And so understanding, right, that Hitler is not a Bond villain. He's not some sort of super evil person that's like a different species, right? He's a very evil man, right? And yet, there is a battlefield within me as well between good and evil. This is in fact, one of the great lessons of Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment, right? If you read Crime and Punishment, and this is a story of Raskolnikov, this axe murderer kills a woman, right? Which every 10th grader should read, by the way. There's something about reading the story of an axe murder in the spring of your 10th grade year that's really important. And I've done it many times, and well, just trust me. But the story of Raskolnikov is not the story of, oh my gosh, look at this evil, horrible, despicable person, right? The story of Crime and Punishment is the story of somebody who's extremely human, who does this extremely evil thing, who frighteningly looks and thinks and talks sometimes a lot like you and like me. And could this person ever be forgiven? Is there any redemption for somebody who makes that kind of error, that most grievous of errors, let's say? So yeah, do we need to tread carefully? We do. But these are exactly the most vital and important conversations that we need to be having with students. So we shouldn't avoid them. We should provoke them. Now, it's not a conversation for second graders, right? So you have to know who you're teaching and what they're ready for. Yes? I thought we might be. All right. I figured on this last one I would just go as far as I could. Take advantage of you. All right. Thanks, guys. Yep.